Oh, wow. So hopefully we're now live, and hopefully you can hear. I can see us. I can see us. Can you
You
hear
can? I
me?
can't. I can.
And can you hear? Yeah.
It's time for copyright violation strikes. No, we're not doing that.
Hey, it says I'm live as well. Oh,
Yeah, I don't see us, but
so
yeah,
this
whatever.
this is amazing. Yeah, it always happens. I don't
Oh
think
my!
live. So I've been well prepared for the stream. I got everything ready. I was like, right, I'm going to restart the computer because yeah, you want to start
Let's
fresh.
go back a step. Mikey was so prepared; he had everything done beforehand. Came on to do some last-minute tweaks and things, and went, "All right, I need to restart the computer, but we're good to go." Restarted the computer, and then what happened, Michael?
I tried to open everything up and it didn't like it at all.
No.
Even a blender froze, everything went, nope, nope, nope. I think trying to open up absolutely everything at the same time really quickly kind of backfired on me.
Although I think Blender Froze would be a nice name for a haircut.
Maybe. Oh. Right, I've got one more thing to do before we start the stream. And no, we're.
Maybe before we start the stream, they're all typing at you.
Hi, guys.
Hello, Gerard. Hello, Roderick. Hello, BB Game Dev. Hello, Jenny.
What?
Hello, Mansa and Gabrielle and Yavuz. And did I miss anybody? Gerard and Michael. Michael's here.
Hello, hello, everybody. Welcome to a very hectic stream. We've got lots to cover today, and it's going to be.
Todd. Hi, Todd.
Hi, Todd. We've got lots to cover today. I want to, first of all, apologize. We are going to launch a course in a moment, and Erin sadly can't be with us. He's still traveling at the moment. So it is going to be geometry nodes for Blender 3 and onwards, which is absolutely fantastic.
Pretty exciting.
The one thing I don't have, because I did have before, but I don't have now, is the publish button. So I've got to go over and la-di-da-di-da-di-da-di-da. I'm going to go publish the course and post the link for you. So this is new, and there's not it's not just a complete repeat of the previous course in 2.93. It's actually got some brand new content in it as well. Similar sort of overall journey, but there's more he wanted to teach. And all being well, later on in the year, there'll be an intermediate to advanced course coming as well. So first of all, let me go and put the course live and give you guys a link. Geometry Nodes is all kinds of exciting.
It is. There's all kinds of magic. Oh, I'm going to close this so the airplanes flying past don't come through the mic.
No, I don't want any planes coming.
You've had enough tech issues without airplanes coming through you.
Exactly. So I'm going to press publish on that, and I'm going to grab this link here. So there is a launch week special. It's good for 1 week, so till next Monday at midnight. Midnight here, so I don't know what that'll be where you are in the world, but this is the course, and I will now play the launch video for you all. So I'll see you back in about a minute.
Hey folks, welcome. My name's Erin and I'll be your instructor for this section. In this part we're going to be looking at geometry nodes, and geometry nodes has actually been in Blender since 2.91. However, in between 2.93 and 3.0 there was a major redesign in the nodes, and so we're going to be exploring this new system called fields now that it's had some time to settle. In this section we're going to learn the UI, we're going to learn to navigate, and some useful shortcuts that are going to help you moving forwards. We'll learn to create a reusable tool as a node group that you can share and use across multiple files. And we'll take this as far as creating an entire scene animated within a single node tree. I'm really excited to see where you're going to take these tools. Having proceduralism as an option for you to lean back on really does elevate your workflow. It lets you really scale things, work stuff at a greater level of fidelity and complexity. So, good luck. I hope to see you on the course.
And we're back. There we go. Whew. So that's absolutely fantastic. I know lots of people have been waiting for an up-to-date course, and Erin's been incredibly busy, and he's got that all sorted for us. Now, if you already on the original course, you're now on that as well. You just need to go to your library and you'll find it there. If you're a lifetime member, you should also have it. And if you're already enrolled in the Blender Creative Series, so the the bundle of courses that this is part of, then you've also got that as well. So a free upgrade for people who had it originally, no matter where you had it from. And that
Yep.
is awesome.
Which is, I'm very excited to see what people make.
Yes, and of course, one of the big things is the system changed massively. So Erin very kindly put on, after it did change, a sort of a translation at the very end
Yeah.
of the course. But obviously, if you're learning something brand new, we can fully appreciate that that is difficult to pick up when you do that. So it's taken a few months to
Managed
sort
to
out.
mute myself just in time there.
Yeah, it's taken a few months to go through. Blender Geometry Nodes itself was still in a bit of flux, so Erin wanted to make sure that the course itself covered everything as up to date as possible. So he's actually done the course in Blender 3.3, so it should be good for the long-term support version, and hopefully they won't change too much.
I'm very excited.
I think they've
I actually
sorted
feel
it
like
out.
I should probably take this course because developing stuff in Nodes is something I'm not very good at. In fact, you and I were just talking about
Yeah.
this with the removal of visual script from Godot, which a
Yes.
lot of people think is a mistake. I have always struggled to see the use case of it. I appreciate that other people see it differently. That's great.
Yeah.
But when I was first learning Godot, I tried visual scripting because I was told, it's the version for people who don't know how to program. And my experience was no. If you don't know what the variables are and you don't know what the functions are and you don't know how it all works, you can't use it. And if you do know that stuff, it's easier to type it. But we'll see.
Yes, I think Godot, I think it's fair to say, suffered a little bit by the visual scripting being underdeveloped. So nowhere
Yeah.
near the capabilities of something like Blueprint would be in Unreal. And
That's it.
and so they've decided not to pursue it. I think that's absolutely fine because of the nature of GD script being relatively straightforward to program in. It's a very Pythonic language. It's very human readable. You don't always need that extra layer of or variation in what you need to do.
I don't get confused with semicolons and curly brackets. It's great.
What? Wait.
Every other programming language, every bug I make is either that or Yan can't count to 5.
That's because you need to start at 0, folks, if you're counting. Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that so Erin and I have had a lot of background discussions on one of the benefits of geometry nodes is so he comes from a design art background, much like myself, and one of the ways that he's approached this is it's a great way of learning maths because you're having to go through vectors. You've got to do multiplications of layers and on and on and on. You're essentially constructing something and learning maths in a visual way, which is a really nice way of approaching
Yeah.
and not only approaching the mathematics, but also understanding why, because you've got that visual guide. You're changing a lever and physically seeing on the screen what the difference is, how it's affecting the geometry, or indeed with materials as well. Very similar with a node setup, you can program just using those nodes.
Yep. Meanwhile, I want to apologize for distracting hand things. By the way, my arthritis is kicking in. This week, I believe, it's blendering stuff.
Yes.
Which means that last week Mikey got to do this. This week I get to put my feet up and read the chat, and Mikey has to entertain everybody.
Yes. So I don't know if we've got everybody who was asking questions earlier. I wanted to be a bit, not a bit random. That's the wrong way of saying it, but a bit more fluid this week, rather than.
I sound like I'm in a tunnel.
Oh, I know why you sound like you're in a tunnel. He won't sound like he's in a tunnel anymore. It's got nothing
It's
to
not
do
on my
with
side.
it.
Fine.
Yeah, it's 100% me. So yeah, when I unmuted you, I unmuted you twice. So now there's 2 of you. Anyway.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So yeah, we're going to go through a few different things in Blender this evening, and we're going to go through some questions as well. So if any of you guys have any questions, if I can't answer them, I'll just say I can't answer them. But I also
Any questions you say?
Any questions? Anyway, so yeah, we just some of you might not know about the Discord, so that's where some of these questions will be coming from. There's a link to the Discord, and one of the first things we're going to start off with is going to be Sketchfab. Now, Sketchfab is a site that you can upload models to. You can use it as a professional way of selling your models as well. I'm not sure what their price plan and everything is. I am logged in at the moment, which is great. And if I share my screen, I've got to remember which button that is. There we go. So here we go. Here's just Sketchfab itself. And one of the things you can do is just click this upload button and drag and drop your stuff into there. But I don't think that is a great way of controlling it. You can just do that. What is also available, and I'll pop a link in the chat here so people can follow along if they want to. There's good chance that things will go wrong as we do this. But I wanted to do that. I wanted to give you guys a sort of a live install of this plugin and just see how we go. Things will probably go wrong, but let's see what happens. Can I do my small head here as well? Hey, there we go. I could do that. No, it covers up too much of the screen at the moment. I'll go back to just the screen. So this is Sketchfab's official Blender add-on. And if we scroll down, it's a zip file. You install it as a regular add-on. So those on a Mac, I don't know if Linux does this, but if you're on a Mac, what tends to happen if you download a zip file is it extracts it for you automatically, which is something you do not want to do.
No, at least the distro I have does not do that.
So I'm going to download this now, Sketchfab plugin, all sorted, brilliant. And from that, we can then go into Blender and install it. I've already got Blender open, so we can pop over and install it. So we're going to go to the edit menu, go down to preferences, go to add-ons, and then we're going to click install and go and find, hopefully it's in the downloads. Let's put it in date order. There it is. Nope, that's not it. Sketchfab plugin. There we go. Install. And then you need to tick this box. Now, there may be the login stuff here. Nope. So there's an option for downloads as well. That's brilliant. So the import export. This is great, but I do believe you need to link it to your account. And I've not read any of the documentation. I'm just going to wing it at this point. So now, once that's installed, depending on how you've got your Blender set up, you may need to go down to the, I think this is known as the hamburger, and make sure you save your preferences. I have auto-save preferences turned on at the moment, so I know that that is now saved. Now, usually it will appear somewhere on your interface. It depends what the add-on does, but it does appear here on your properties menu or your N key, and you can go down to Sketchfab and you can activate the add-on. It's going to ask for an email and password. So I'm going to drag that off screen for the moment. And, well, actually, the easiest thing for me to do is not play around with that, but just bring our heads back. So why would you want to upload your stuff to Sketchfab? That's always a good question. Why not upload it anywhere else? Well, one of the great things about Sketchfab is that when you do upload, you can show off your models and whiz around them. No one needs an additional plugin. The website handles that for you, which is pretty awesome, to be honest. So
It is.
I'm not even, of course, because
Now, this is technology you and I were looking at back in the Mag Racer project.
Yes.
Where we wanted people to upload stuff. So, yeah, it's pretty nifty to be able to upload to a website and have people just turn the model around.
Yeah, there are a couple of like website plugins that you can run on your own server, etc. And then you can basically share stuff and have it on there. We looked at doing that our end, and I just didn't have the time to sort it out, basically. And working out how to integrate it with our own website is an extra challenge on top of that, which is less fun. So let's just try this. Perhaps I should have signed in first. I don't know.
Who knows? Now, Mikey's struggling signing in. Does anyone know his password? Because that would be helpful.
I wonder whether it's because I've got a social sign in. That might be the reason why. I don't know.
Game Dev says, or BB Game Dev says, I see not many people use Sketchfab when showing off their personal works on ArtStation. Not technically a question, but I thought it was an interesting point. He also suggested Quirt123.
I tried it. It didn't work.
I mean, traditionally, the most common password is password.
Definitely isn't password, but it definitely is something that I wouldn't know either because I use the password manager. That's interesting. Maybe the plugin's got a bug
Excuse me.
at the moment, so perhaps I can't answer this question properly at the moment. Hmm. I think we should move on from that. I think that's
Yeah.
a failed experiment.
I mean, live TV, it happens.
Yep. So Jenny asked that question, and I will have a look off screen for you guys because I don't think it'll be
Jenny did say that everything will go wrong with Sketchfab. So I think she gets extra points for seeing that coming.
predicting it. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I don't know why that's not accepting my username and password, but there we go. It's not. But if you guys want to try it out, I'm sure it's pretty straightforward to do. I remember using it a few years back, and it was a matter of clicking it and uploading it. One of the what's it called, formats, one of the formats, the GLTF format, is something they do actively support, and
Mhm.
that's actually a format that we focus on quite a bit because it works incredibly well with Godot. I'm
Mhm.
not sure yet whether or not it's supported in Unreal and Unity, but I have heard rumors of it being supported because it's that open format, which should be
Yeah.
incredibly useful. Just added FBX. One of the issues I've had with just uploading stuff directly to Sketchfab is textures missing or materials in the wrong place, or if it's an animated thing, armature's not working properly. So
Yeah.
there's a few quirks to it, I think is the best thing to say when it comes to that. Now, hidden somewhere on this screen, bear with me a second, is Discord, so I can have a look at the next question that we had. So Gavin Barnard, I don't know if you're in the chat at the moment, but he usually exports an STL. That's what he does for 3D printing, and then yes. So one of the issues with an STL is I believe that whilst you will have your geometric data coming across, you won't have any animations, you won't have any materials or textures. It specifically doesn't have those in there. I might be wrong, but I don't think I am in that particular case. So I wouldn't use an STL. I'd probably use a GLTF to begin with. OBJ might work. It's a bit of an archaic format now, but it is very simple as well. So
It is.
it does have that going for it. So if
I mean,
you
really, my only problem with OBJ is we've been trying to use it for years. I mean, people have been trying to use it for years for things it was never designed to do.
Mhm.
So it falls short.
One of the issues with an OBJ, of course, is everything is centered around the origin if you export it. So if you need a bit of your model offset deliberately, a door, for instance, it ends up
Yeah.
being recentered around the object itself, which isn't great if you need pivot points and things like that, because then you've got to try and manually align it later. Um, Oh, great one from Pacost. What is your preferred method for retopology? Is it using an external tool or the built-in remesh modifier? Neither. So, retopology, for those who don't know, is where you take something, often when you've sculpted something and the geometry is all messy. You've used tools. In fact, we could probably go ahead and do a bit of a live one on that. So let's switch over to the main screen again. So let's get rid of some of these extra bits around here. So if you've done some sculpting or something along those lines and you may want to, well, there's no geometry at the moment. So one of the things that I think Pakosh is saying there is remeshing. Is it Control and R? I think it is, yeah. I don't know what the settings are for it at the moment, but you can remesh to a certain size and you can start modeling and then you can remesh again, which is great if you've got, I think it's this tool here. Is this the hook? Elastic deform, snake hook. That's the one I want. So then you can pull things out. And the problem when you pull things out like this is you end up stretching the geometry and then remeshing, again, Control and R, can help smooth that lot out and add in additional geometry. But when you do this, you end up with, well, I've created a bit of a mess there because I really went for it. But you end up with uneven geometry. Now, whilst this, I think if you do the remesh and we have a look in edit mode at it, do we have quads? Does it actually do quads everywhere? It looks like it might have made the whole mesh quads. But what it won't have done is done anything along the lines of making sure you've got edge loops running around your model, so or face loops for that matter. So if we go into face select, hold down Alt and click on one of these edges, you can see here it has a face loop running around like so. But the problem with that is you probably don't want it running around there. That's not defining the shape. You'd probably want it sort of coming up and around here and then probably looping back round here. So maybe joining up along here. So retopology would be taking this mesh here and remaking that mesh, retopologizing it in terms of making sure that edge loops and face loops. And this is really important more so if you're going to deform your mesh, either through animation or shape keys or anything along those lines. Because if you start doing it and your supporting loops are in the wrong place, you'll get artifacting, you'll get creasing in the wrong place. It'll be really difficult to work around it because the topology, the way that your mesh is laid out, is not supporting what you're trying to do with it. Now, if this was an amazing sculpture that you were just rendering out, retopologizing is probably something you don't want to do. That's one of the things with retopologizing and mesh in general. If you've got a model and you're not going to do any animation with it or anything along those lines, and it looks good, retopologizing for the sake of doing it really isn't worth doing it. If you needed a really clean model because you wanted it in your portfolio, that's something different. But knowing how to manage your time and not doing something like retopologizing when it doesn't need it is probably the way to go when it comes to that.
BB Game Dev has added that if it needs to be animated, then do retopoloflow and do it manually.
Yes. Nothing beats doing it manually. It almost sort of balances out for me. Very similar to um, how you would have your UV unwrapping. At any point, you can smart UV unwrap a model, and for literally 90% of your work, that's probably fine. But that manual, I wouldn't go about doing manual unwrapping all the time unless there was a specific reason for it, because at that point, you're spending a lot of time on the unwrap, and whilst that can make your model look much better, it can also be a complete waste of time depending on what you're doing at the time. Now, if you were doing something that required more detail, more fidelity to it, and where you couldn't hide seams behind other bits of geometry, or if you're working with a team that expects a certain type of UV unwrap. So if you're working with a either just a partner or even yourself, if you're taking that model out of Blender into a third party program, or even in Blender, if you're just doing some texture painting, what you've got to bear in mind is if your UV unwrap makes no sense, then it's going to be incredibly difficult to paint on the UV unwrap. You can still paint on the model, but actually the UV unwrap itself will be unintelligible. It will make no sense whatsoever. And there is a particular issue that you will have if you don't have margins set up properly, where you paint on this side and it starts appearing on another bit of your model, and that can just ruin your model entirely if you go for that.
Would you like the next question?
Oh,
It
yeah,
occurred to me that I could go to Discord and read these, since I'm just sitting here looking pretty.
Oh, yes. What's the next
We have another
question?
question from Jenny. Jenny asks, how's the Python programming coming along with Blender? Have you learned a lot to teach a course in it?
That's a very good question. That's actually the next one on the Discord as well. So, yes, I've been playing around a lot with
I was
Python.
reading the Discord.
That's why. That's why. So, when it comes to Python in Blender, I have I've gone through so much now, and I'm ready to teach a beginner's course with it. There's other stuff I need to get out of the way first, but that is incoming. And I also want to do an intermediate one, probably focused on add-on creation. And there'll be more news about that when it's not just a concept at the moment. There's not really a learning journey with it. But what I have done when it comes through making Python, I've done lots of. If you've taken any of the Blender courses so far, all the way going back to Godot Getaway, using Python to enhance yourself, to augment yourself. One of the great things that you can do with Python is if you've got a series of assets that you need to recenter in your scene and export each one individually, and then reset your scene back up. You can do that by clicking one button. And there's always a balance to be had. And this is true whether it's geometry nodes where it takes maybe a whole day to set up a geometry node setup in order to make a simple model. But now you can make 500 different of them as per the weapons course that we released recently. That uses geometry nodes to create an infinite number, or not an infinite number, but whatever it is to the power of n variations when you give it for instance, a sword with the pommel, the handle, and the blade itself.
Blade.
Yep. And so using either geometry nodes, or I could have done Python with that. In fact, we use a bit of Python in it because once we've gone through and we've made all of those models, we need to export them.
Mm.
And that's not part of the geometry nodes workflow. So then we switch over to doing some Python in Blender itself, and then being able to export all of those models in one click. In fact, then you can automate Blender. And I think that's what the key is for anybody getting into or wants to know, why would I even want to do any coding when I'm making models? But being able to automate part of your workflow is, I mean, it's just saves you so much
Right.
time.
The idea is not use Python to create a 3D mesh, because that's kind of what the interface for Blender is for. You're not
Yeah,
replacing
yeah.
the interface. It's for all those things that the interface isn't able to do, that you know the program can do, but it's not.
Yeah. And so one of the things that I want to sort of air here at the moment is that if anybody has any sort of questions when it comes to Python, or things that they want to be able to do automatically in Blender but they're struggling at the moment, then do shout out, because that may actually inspire either a YouTube video or an entry into a course specifically on how to do that type of workflow. I mean, once you've learned how to export using Python in Blender, then you can export as an STL, you can export as an FBX, you can do a GLTF. You do have to go through and reset up the export parameters because they're different for each export type. But once you've done that, it saves you so much
I have a
time.
question about that just came into the Discord, which we'll get to in a second.
Awesome. Well, I was just
Yep.
wrapping up there, so fire away.
Great. Well, first, we have another question from Jenny. Are you presentable?
Always.
Good.
I'm not going to prove it by standing up.
He might not always be decent, but he's always presentable.
Yes.
Got a question here from Yavuz. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Do feel free to correct me, because growing up with a name like Jan, you kind of get used to saying, no, my name isn't Yawn.
Yarn.
Exporting from Blender is very complicated. This, of course, depends on coordinate system differences between software.
Yep.
Is there an easy way to export from Blender to game engines, specifically Unity in his case, especially empties for grouping related objects and armatures that don't break too much?
Well,
I got it right.
woohoo! So, I'm going to go ahead and open up a barrel, something nice and simple.
And I'm going to mute my typey.
I like that. I've moved it, so I can't find it. Hold on a second. Let me go in. Documents. There we go. Repos. Where's the repos? It was at the top. Yep, there it is. Let's go in here. Something like this. So this is from one of the modules of the Blender Creative Suite. This is your basic modeling in Blender. Oh, something's come out pink. I wonder why it's come out pink. I don't think I've used textures in this. So we go through, and this is part of the course where we actually create and use the asset manager in it. Very, very useful, because then you can go, I want a car in my scene, and just click and drag it across like so. And it comes in with all the materials. If you've got those applied, maybe a barrel stack, pop that in. Very quick and easy to build up a scene. So when you're exporting something from Blender and you want it to work in Unity, for example, first of all, when you go to your export, if you're doing something like this regularly, here's a great tip for you. So you're always exporting as an FBX, right click and add it to your quick favorites. Then we can go through and say, well, this car queue brings up your quick favorites, and then you can go straight to the export screen. Now, do bear in mind, I'm just going to cancel that for the moment. There is the quick menu there when you press Q, and this comes up. is mode dependent. So if you're actually in edit mode, which you can't do when you drag in an asset like this, but if you were in edit mode, for example, then you would have to switch over to object mode to bring up this particular menu. Right. So when you're in here, one of the things that I always prefer to do, I'm just going to export this wherever. Um, but think about what you want to do and what you want to export. So to answer the question of how to make sure it comes across in Unity correctly, because of the Cartesian, basically Z up, Y up, and it's left-handed versus right-handed. So you're moving between Cartesian coordinate systems. But the main thing to remember is to click this button here that says Apply Transform. That's one of the critical things. Otherwise, when you import it into Unity, it will be gimbal locked. And that will cause you obviously a problem when it comes to rotations. There are other ways around that, like childing your model to an empty and then using that empty as a proxy to control all of that. But that really is starting to add sort of extra complexity where it's not necessary. A couple of the things that I often make sure that I'm doing when I'm exporting, selected objects. That's always a good thing because you very rarely need to export absolutely everything from a scene, especially if you're working on multiple models. Might not be that, but you might not want lamps and everything else coming across as well. So you can obviously control some of that under here as well. So we can do limit to selected objects, or we could do active collection. So you can group everything that you're exporting in a collection and make sure that is. Let's come out of here for a second. That is the active collection, so it'll be the one that's selected. Let's go back to our export. Visible objects is really good if you're hiding things out of the way. So you might hide out of the way empties and other control things that you've got in Blender that you don't want to export. There you got your object types. And of course, you can control all of this in Python as well. You can say what you want, what you don't. And once you've worked out what you need to do here specifically for your workflow, going back to just incorporating that Python discussion from earlier, once you've worked out what you need to do in order to export, then you can go ahead and script it. And then it'll be a matter of running a script, or even if you get to the point of creating your own add-on, you just click a button on your add-on and it will do it all for you. Now, what tends to happen is that changes from project to project. It might not, but having a script there that you just alter a few lines of and you've got a new script, boom, and it saves you so much time faffing around once you've got those settings done. What it does, unfortunately, sometimes do is it leads you to that where you don't use this for so long you forget what they all do. I've been in that position before. I'll just use my export script, and occasionally Blender will update its Python API and rename something in here in the background, and then your script doesn't work anymore. And it can take a bit of debugging to try and work that out. Applying transform is really important. And now, could you reread the question for me, Jan? Because there was an extra bit in there about armatures.
Yes, I can. Let me just go back. Especially empty game objects for grouping related objects and armatures not breaking too much or armatures break too much.
Right. When with empty objects, good luck. Um,
Hmm.
I've not used.
We've had this a lot with Godot, haven't we? Trying to get empties to come through.
So when it comes to empty objects, I've not used Unity in a while, about a year or so, and I've had it export absolutely fine and contain empty control objects, as you're saying, maybe an empty where a light needs to go, so that when you're in engine, you can actually just, you've made the artistic decision in Blender and in the engine, oh, that's where I want the light to go. And indeed, you could script that in engine to find all the empties named lamp or start with lamp and put a light there, just a basic lamp that you could sort out later on. Now, that stopped working midway through this year because someone had a question, and I had a look at it and I was left scratching my head, and then it started working again. So I don't know whether or not there was just a problem with the Blender exporter or the Unity importer, or there was a tick box that needed ticking. I would need to have a specific look at that to work out what else needs to be done in order to export, including those. Geometry. We'll go down to armature in a second. We'll just go through the rest of this real quick. Smoothing groups are something that you're going to come across. This doesn't typically affect Unity, but with Unreal, if you leave it as normals only, it will complain when you import that there are no smoothing groups. So switch it to face, and that stops that error coming up every time that it comes up. And if that causes you any issues, usually Edge is fine. But with your smoothing groups, for those who want to know a little bit more about that, simply comes down to if you shade something smooth. Blender doesn't call it smoothing groups, by the way. That's something I think that Autodesk and sort of 3ds Max and Maya call them. If we go to the the mesh data properties here, and go down to normals, and we turn on this auto smoothing, there we go. We've got an overall smoothing group applied to the entire model. Now you can also do this by marking specific faces and edges as what is the terminology. If you've ever wondered when you've selected an edge what these other options are, marking sharp. So if you mark something sharp, then it will not be it will be smoothed basically, or not smooth. If it's marked sharp like this, you get this lovely orange line. And then if you shade smooth without this turned on, nope. Where is it? It's under the modifiers, weighted normal, and oh, it does require this auto to be on, like so. It does require that, and then you should be able to keep sharp, and it works out though. So that's important for that. It's not remember. Oh, I'm in edit. Let's see if it switches and remembers. There we go. Quick favorites. We go back to the export. Let's scroll down. We were on geometry before. Let's bring this in. What else have we got? Armature. Right. Every time that I've exported so far, when it comes to models that require a skeletal animation, so you've got basically two types of animation. You've got bone-based and then shape key. I'm pretty sure there's other types of animation, like if you in the game engine itself, if you were to code it moving from one place to another, that is a viable option for you. But when it comes to exporting from Blender and keeping animations, it's going to be doing something with this. Either your armature, which is a bone-based rig. I haven't had to change any of these. Occasionally, with a humanoid rig, I can't remember whether the leaf bones need to be on or off, but Unity has an auto rig system built into it. Going back to the original question, and that either needs this on or off. I don't have Unity installed at the moment, so I couldn't test it even if I wanted to. So I think you'll either have to toggle that on or off depending on Unity itself, and then it will actually auto rig your model and match up your bones that you've got to the actual character's bones itself. Baking an animation is another way of sort of animating, where you actually cannot alter the bones afterwards. So this is a way of perhaps, or another animation type would be like a physics simulation. And if you are exporting a physics simulation, you probably don't want an FBX. If you're exporting a physics simulation, so you bake all of that information, you've got a building falling down or something along those lines, then instead of using an FBX, that won't be suitable for it. You'll actually want a collider, I believe, which is this one at the top here. And I think Alembic does it as well. And I'm not sure about Universal Scene Description. I don't know if those come across. I've not played with them fully yet. But yeah, if you have an object falling apart and if you've already got the physics baked into it in Blender, why you do that though, I don't know, because Blender, quite frankly, sucks at physics simulations. It really does depend on what you're trying to do. But if
Tell
you
us how you really feel.
well, the one thing that you can do in Blender is you could do a cell fracture and have the thing crumble apart. That might be a bit more difficult to do within the game engine. So you can do certain things that help out. But if you need to do anything physical that interacts with your player, etc., then I would probably do the physics in the game engine itself, where you can do. Right. Well,
Good.
I hope
That sounds pretty good.
I
Would you
hope-
like some more questions?
yeah, and I'm going to change the scene. Our lovely faces again, while you give me the next question.
Okay. Another one from Jenny. Jan reads all the questions, doesn't he?
unless I get there first.
Yep. One from Munzer with a similar one from BB Game Dev. So I'm actually going to put these both together.
Okay, sounds good.
From Munzer, we have, is there a way to save export preferences? And from BB Game Dev, by the way, can you somehow save export settings for a given blend file? It always resets to defaults between Blender restarts.
So that is actually a great question. The first one is yes, write a Python script, and then all of your defaults are there. But if you don't want to do that, what it should do when you're exporting is you've got your operator presets at the top here, and I believe if you add one and call it my export settings, it will actually remember exactly what you've got, and then you should be able to go down and pick it up. So let's just select some of these and say we're only going to export mesh from an active collection with the selected objects. We're going to apply the transform, and we're going to go face here because I've said that's useful to have. And then, we're not going to bake any animation stuff. And I'm just going to put, I dump this somewhere. I dump it on my desktop and clean it up later. Export the FBX. And then when we go back to it, it will remember it, as you were saying. It will remember that it's what it was doing previously. And what we should be able to do is then press add again. And I'm going to call this new settings. And click OK. And then hopefully what we can do is quit Blender completely. Reopen Blender. I'm just guessing here, by the way, if this doesn't work. Tough. Quick favorites, it's remembered that. Awesome. And so if I go down and go new settings, there we go. It's remembered all of my settings from before. And the my export settings was the default. So there you go. Well, hey, I not only managed to answer a question, but it worked first time.
I know. Good question from Todd just came in. Can you explain how to model from reference images properly on multiple axes? Or possibly on multiple axes? He might be talking about doing it on axe blades, but I'm going to guess axes.
So you bring in your reference material, whatever it happens to be, and you put it on your views. That's pretty straightforward, and you align them and everything. But there's always this issue when you're modeling from reference images that sometimes they don't line up. And one of the key things is there to not worry about that too much. It's there as a guide more than axis. It's more there as a guide to make sure that you get your general proportions right. That the wheel, if it's a car, the wheel's roughly the right size, it's the right length. The proportions are right. That's one of the key things there. But one of the problems you can have with orthographic perspectives, which is how you generally get your reference material, your schematics in, is that when you flip from this side to that side, you can't really align the vertex properly. You're like, well, it's kind of here, but when I flip it round, it needs to be over here, and it can destroy your model. I tend to work from low poly first. Whenever it comes, even if you're doing a super high detailed model, because then you've got less things to move around and less things to worry about. So if you're doing the bonnet of a car and it slopes down in a nice cool slope, but it's also got maybe a I don't know what it'd be, like a carburetor bump on it, or air intake or air scoop, or just an engine bump on the bonnet. Don't worry about that. Don't model that yet. Make sure you've got the overall shape of the bonnet right. And then when you look at it from the side and it's just sloping down, maybe then you can put in an edge loop and then pull it up to the right place. And if you work from that really low poly model initially, you'll have the general form right before you start adding in detail. One of the worst things I've ever done myself is you start putting detail in too early. Everybody does it. They're like, oh, I really like this bit of the, again, car. Let's say you're working on a car, and you end up in this position where you've got like the light housing perfect. But then if you try and change like the shape of the wheel arch or the bonnet going back, or hood, if you're in America, then you end up with this distortion and you can't get it right because you've done so much detail here that moving a wider thing just destroys it. So always work from a lower poly model upwards so you can get the proportions right, and then focus on the detail and try and do the detail over the entire model rather than trying to do one specific area in intense detail. And if you zoom out of your model, one of the general rules that I'd stick to is do all of your faces kind of are they roughly the same size? It's very similar to when you're UV unwrapping and you've got that black and white grid like a chessboard. Are all of the squares kind of uniform? Obviously, you'll have larger areas and smaller areas, but if you've got this area where you have to zoom in order to see the mesh detail and everything else is big and chunky, that's probably a bad sign. Probably.
I mean, unless there's very specific reasons, like the camera in your game is going to zoom in on this bit but nowhere else, in which case maybe. But
Yeah,
then
maybe that
there's also ways you
super
could cheat way
detail.
around that.
Yes. Yeah, but having a uniform topology basically across your model helps with not only its form but also you when you're trying to model.
That was a good question. I like that. I had one, but it's gone now. So, what was my question, Mikey?
I have no idea. Are we out of questions for the moment? Because I've got some.
We are out of questions for the moment.
If you do have another question, do shout. I want to play with some materials. I'm going to go find myself a model to work with to begin with, and then I will open up. And I've moved all my stuff around, haven't I? So trying to find. For those who don't know, about a month ago, I bought a new SSD from my computer, and I decided to record the entire process. In fact, Jenny was asking some questions about building her computer. I believe she's built her computer now, and the same time it's taken me to try and put this video together. I have, hats off to the people, whether you're talking about people that I follow, Linus Tech Tips, Jay's 2 Cents, Bitwit, Paul's Hardware, all of those sort of tech tubers who managed to video black computers, record them in video, and they look good. Now, I mean, my computer.
Are they using a black light?
I have no. That would be even worse. So I cleaned my computer. I've got microfiber cloth, lightly damped it and cleaned the thing down, and then I start recording. I'm like, why is it all grey and why can I see fingerprints everywhere? Oh my! And I was just like, well, I've got to concede at this point that it's not going to look beautiful.
Okay, I learned something really cool related to light. To explain why I got there, I'm going to take what you just said and then tell a very brief story about when I was an undergrad, and we were doing our final, which was a group-directed piece. So each of us were directing a little scene.
Yes.
And we were getting ready for the tech rehearsal, which is basically putting everything together the day before the dress rehearsal, the day before our performance, which is when we're graded. And one guy had done no work. And everyone's journaling, so it's quite clear he's done no work. So he comes up to me and says, yeah, I want to help with the tech. And I said, David, you don't know what you're doing. You've never been up a ladder. You don't know any of the lamps. We can't use you. He's like, you've got to use me or I'll fail. So I said, all right, can you go to the store and get me some black lighting gel? Now, lighting gel is a colored filter you put in front of a lamp.
Yeah.
And it only lets through that color of light. Black lighting gel only lets through the absence of light. In other words, it doesn't exist. You would have to hold your hand in front of the lamp. But he was gone for 4 hours and he came back furious because he'd been waiting outside the storeroom, waiting for the professor to be free and come through. Okay, so that's a quick little thing. And the reason why that's funny or mean is because in theater lighting, we're using subtractive light. The filter subtracts everything but this color.
Yeah.
If you've got black, you're subtracting everything. Doesn't work. Okay. Which led me to think, why are the primaries different for emittive rather than reflective light? I still don't know exactly why, but I did find something out. The primaries in reflective light, in paint, in pigment, are not actually red, yellow, blue.
Yeah.
They're cyan, magenta, and the other one.
Yeah.
The primaries in pigment are the secondaries in light, and the secondaries in light are the primaries in pigment. Why? Because raisins.
Yes. But trying to make children use cyan, magenta, and yellow to paint something. Well, yeah. It's
okay.
Challenging.
Question from Munzer. Is there an easy way to use texture paint in Blender to paint a metallic color or some other paint that involves more than one texture? Jenny says, I use Substance Painter. Munzer says, I try not to use Substance Painter. Jan says, I use Substance Painter too. Mikey says,
Yes. So when it comes to multiple textures, one of the challenging things to remember is to make sure you've got the right texture selected when you start doing your painting, because it's very, very easy to forget about switching it and you end up painting on the wrong layer. Blender by default is a bit lacking behind when it comes to its texture paint mode, and trying to set up a layered approach is quite challenging because you have to manually go in and select the texture that you're painting on. Now, when you say metallic color, I presume you're actually just talking there about whether something's metal or not, whether it's metal or dielectric.
yeah, because you could also mean pearlescent, which is a different effect.
Yeah, when it comes to a PBR workflow, so physically based rendering, you also get MPR as well. I think is the opposite, not physically
That's
based.
talk radio, isn't it?
I don't know. Maybe. So you get physically based rendering, which a lot of game engines are all set up to do. So when it comes to that, you have an albedo, which is the color of your surface. No light involved here. It's the color of the surface, so there's no shadows or anything else. So in fact, I'm going to bring up the shading workspace in Blender just so I've got my thing. So Blender calls this the base color. It's sometimes known as the albedo, and sometimes it's called diffuse. It's the basic color of the surface. And remember that when we talk about a material, we're talking about how that surface interacts with light. So, what's the desired response from it? When it comes to the next one down that a lot of things have with their PBR workflow is metallic. Now, in the olden days, it's still a thing you can do today. You would have a specular workflow, and these days you have a metallic and roughness workflow. A specular and something, I can't remember what it is. They're almost a substitute for one another. Oh, but it's not a one for one replacement. If you're doing something that's supposed to be physically accurate, then you either have a metallic surface or not. Obviously, you can say this part of the surface when you're texture painting is metallic and this bit is not. That's absolutely fine. But there's no such thing as a halfway when it comes to whether a surface is metallic or not, because it's it's how physics works. I can't remember. I used to know the detail of the difference between a dielectric surface and a metallic surface, something to do with electrons and how they interact with the light interacting with the surface. So that's important. That typically a metallic map will be black and white. It will not have grayscale on it. It can do for artistic license, but if you're being true in terms of physically based rendering, you won't have that. Roughness is another one. That's a grayscale. If possible, things like roughness would be great if you had them not as an 8-bit image, but as a higher bitrate image, probably 16, because then you can have a smoother gradient between where things are rough and where they're not.
I have a question for you that just I meant to ask a couple of weeks back, but I forgot. With regards to metallic and specular,
Yeah.
if you're using an image for both of these,
Yep.
is it a bad idea to set the metallic to be the alpha channel of the specular?
It depends on your engine and whether or not you can extract that information. So if your game engine doesn't support the fact that you've imported it as an RGB image or an RGBA image, and you can't
Then you should
break
be using
out,
Godot. Yeah.
yeah. Well, for instance, it's quite common for the ambient occlusion, the metallic, and the roughness to be baked into an RGB image and used. And so you have two textures. You have the color information, and then you have another RGB image that contains the roughness, the metallicity, and the what's the other one I just said? The ambient occlusion. Now, ambient occlusion doesn't exist on the principled BSDF shader node in Blender. That's because Blender doesn't need to fake ambient occlusion, and it's a toggle you can turn on elsewhere. But in Game Engine, it's often used to help shadow certain areas. Now, painting your albedo and metallic at the same time doesn't make much sense.
Right, because that's very different information.
Yeah,
Metallic would be, is this a metal?
yeah,
It's a yes or no question. And as you were saying earlier, you can kind of get around it, but that's not what it's for. Albedo is what are the colors on each pixel
yeah.
or texel, if we're going to be accurate about it.
Or if you're talking about the texture itself, then it's just the
Now, what
pixel.
you can do, and I know you don't want to use this, you want to use Blender, but if you're using something
Yep.
like Substance Painter or Mixer or whatever else, you can create a texture and then assign that to a
Yep.
paintbrush and then just paint detail of that metal or those scratches or whatever else it
Yeah,
is.
and because of the way that's set up, your paintbrush has different channels to it, which
Mhm.
it then assigns. Oh, well, over this thing I'm painting here is metal and it's this color, do this. So,
Yeah. So one of the easiest things you could do is say, okay, there's a new layer. On this layer, I'm using a paintbrush, and this paintbrush has this height information. So we're scoring into it, and it's going to be more metallic and a different color, and it's going to look like we've scratched the paint on the car.
yeah, exactly. I have a mesh, not metallic, and I want to draw some decoration. So you'll need to, first of all, UV unwrap it. Even if you're taking it outside of Blender to do
Mhm.
this work, you're going to have to UV unwrap it. Now, remember, um, or a word of caution, you can help speed up your workflow if you've got a mirrored UV setup. So you only have to paint on one side and it comes out the other. But if you're using something like text, that will not work unless your text can also be mirrored. And sometimes you don't want uniform detail across left
Yep.
and right parts of your model. So just bear that in mind. One of
Especially if you're baking shadows in.
Yeah, if the moment you have a reflected mesh like that with a reflected UV, you can't use it for lighting information. You'd need to. You can have a different UV. You can unwrap more than once, so you can balance those things out as well. To paint the decoration, I'd literally create a texture, plug it. Well, let's do it. Let's do it. Let's go ahead. Main screen. Excellent. You guys can see that. So we have here our cube or whatever, and the base color. Let's lower it a little so we've got a sort of so just presume this has a texture plugged into it and it's just grey. And then we want some areas of it that are going to be metallic. So we bring this out. Blender by default will assume that you're using UV. So at this point, I can just pop in an image texture. So I'm going to search for this and go to image texture color. And then you would have an input going in here. So I'm going to create a new texture. This is the one I'm going to paint on, paint my detail on. And I'm going to call this metal, rock, etc. Now, black means not metallic. So that's fine as a starting image. And there we go. So this looks exactly the same as it did before. But if I go ahead now and open up, making sure that I'm on the metal layer, this is what I was saying earlier. It's important to recognize. In the viewport here, we're going to see what we're painting. And so I can come in. I don't have my stylus plugged in at the moment. So we can just do this. I don't know what face I was writing on. Anyway, it's here. And of course, you can do it here as well. I would recommend a stylus for this, by the way. So if you did want to do some fancy squiggles or whatever it was you were doing, you can do it a bit more precisely. In the shading workspace now, we've got this, which is the metal layer saying this part is metallic and this part is not. It's pretty much as straightforward as that. Does that make sense? I hope so.
Makes sense to me. Some other questions. Such a sweet cat. Where did you model it? I originally modeled it when I was living in New York, and rendering two tiny kittens in a studio apartment in the Upper East Side did not get me a lot of sleep. And then
Really?
when I moved to, they were running along the walls like they thought they were in a John Woo movie. When I moved
Brilliant.
to Brooklyn, well, first Chinatown, then
Yeah.
Brooklyn, then Chinatown. They came with me, obviously. And when I moved to New Jersey, they weren't too sure about that, but they did that. When I moved from New Jersey to England, they did not like that. And it's one of the main reasons why moving back to the States would be difficult because I'm not leaving my cats behind and I don't think they'll make it.
So,
Question for you, though, from Todd.
yeah.
Could you use the same texture in multiple materials and one material is metallic or emissive or just normal color, etc.?
Yeah, of course. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. One thing to remember about a texture is it's just a set of information. You're
Yeah.
literally got these parameters. So back in Blender for a second.
Would it make sense if we remind people that the reason it's called UV is each vertex has an X, Y, Z coordinate, but you're trying to map two-dimensional image information
Yep.
onto three-dimensional space information, so you need two more coordinates for each vertex. The U and the V is the X, Y on the two-dimensional. So this
Yes.
bit here has the UV of 0, 0, which is that part of the image, and the X, Y, Z, which tells you where it is in space.
Yeah, and it just maps it to here. So this image here is actually quite wasteful.
Mhm.
If you were using this, all of this area that's outside the sort of lighter grey cross that we have there is wasted space in theory. But what you would end up doing is, say we this area here that said high, if we made that area larger, we would increase the resolution on that particular face. The downside of that is you can end up with areas that have more detail than are necessary. And this is why it's important when you're UV unwrapping your model that you actually have a uniform distribution of your UV unwrap. Otherwise, you'll end up with areas that are stretched, distorted, or even just have more detail. If it's a pattern like a wood pattern, it would look twice as dense or half as dense. And that really stands out. Humans have this knack of spotting stuff. Now, I came in here to just play around with the shading workspace. So when we're adjusting this and we're saying it's 100% metallic, i.e., white, it's like having a texture that's 100% white or having a texture that's 100% black, and that's all that we're doing when we're adjusting this slider here. Now, once you actually plug this in, you're just saying that part of it at this point is going to be, in this case, just white. And a texture is just a way of controlling this value rather than it just being uniform. A great example of this would be to add in, I love a Voronoi texture, so let's bring up a Voronoi texture. Again, this is going to be mapped by default to a UV space, and the default cube is already unwrapped. But if I plug this in, let's do the distance and plug it into the roughness, we'll end up with parts of our model that are shiny and parts that are not. If you go to a steeper angle, you can much more easily see the reflective areas of your model. And we can see there, we've got these, it's almost like puddles at this point in time. Now, we can change how things are mapped as well. You can plug a different coordinate system into this if you want to. But generally, you can just plug things in like this. I can make this nice and large like so. And then it looks like you've got puddles on the surface. And you could do the same. You could swap this out for, instead of a Voronoi texture, you can plug in something else that's often used is under texture here. We can pick a Musgrave texture. So that's more cloud-like. And we plug that into where the roughness is going to stand out a little bit more. There you go. There's more of your puddle type stuff that you can have. Almost looks like a river running across the surface. But adding textures like this, whether it's procedural or something you've drawn on, or a mixture of both, because you can do a mixture of both, it just adds variation to the surface of your model. And one of the things that really helps a model stand out is when you start adding some sort of textural information to it, whether it's procedural or not, because suddenly it becomes a bit more believable. Unless you're going for a cartoon effect or a flat shaded effect, adding detail, even if you scaled this up, suddenly this surface, it almost looks like a granite work surface from a distance now, doesn't it? Let's make that
It does.
an obsidian cube.
Sorry, I had myself muted while Caboodle decided to start clawing my hand playfully because I thought if I start screaming,
People will wonder what's going on in the background.
and if they're wearing headphones, they'll get grumpy at me.
That's a very good point. I've just seen the time.
Yep.
And I'm enjoying myself. But before we wrap up for the evening, I hope that answered your question, Todd. Can you use the same texture in multiple materials? Yes. In fact, that's quite optimal, by the way. If you're reusing a texture over and over again, and then I know in Unreal, for instance, you can have an instance of something, and once you've got that instance, it reduces the draw calls massively. So yeah, using a texture again will reduce the render RAM limit that you have. So if you're especially if it's a large texture. So a great example of reusing a texture over and over again would be having a texture atlas where you've got multiple textures for multiple objects on one texture. I believe that's exactly how Minecraft does its textures. It's all on one big sheet. Whether or not, oh dear, Todd, oh dear, his internet went out during my answer.
I saw.
Very opportune. Um, so yeah, it is an optimization step, and it will depend on the platform you're going for. Because whilst it'd be really awesome to bake all of your textures into one 8K texture, that may increase your loading times. Or in a particular, why spend? Let's say it's 10 seconds for an 8K texture. I'm just making this number up. It's not real world, but for the sake of argument, if it took 10 seconds to load up an 8K texture, which is massive compared to like a 512 by 512. But say the particular level you're in or the particular models you were loading up only took up a 512 by 512 portion of that huge area, you'd have maybe a quarter of a second loaded time versus 10 seconds, or it may be even a larger difference than that. So, whilst it can be more optimal to store everything in one place, it has its downsides as well. And the other thing is if you're working in a team, you would need to make sure that those assets were available. If you had two artists working on something, and you've got working on the same file, that's impossible when it comes to which version is true. So having multiple textures when you're working and then combining them later on into a bigger atlas, that is also something that's often done. And then you're working with small, really quick to edit files, and then later on you can put them into large maps if you need to. Will MIP mapping work well with big texture atlas? As long as it's a power of 2, yes, because then it just works. What you will end up with if you're not careful is if you go too low detail. So if you've got a 4K texture, so 4096 pixels wide by 4096 pixels high, we end up with you might take up too little space, and then when it's mapped down, you end up with garbage. You end up with something that should have been many more pixels. But you can make that decision as you play with them. If you were
I have a cat on my arm, so I can't use the computer very well. If you were very arty-farty and more knowledgeable than Daz, as well as spelling, you could use the RGB and A channels for different things from the same texture. Yes,
yes,
that was my question with
yeah,
the thing earlier.
yeah, we were talking
the-
about that earlier, Daz, where you have I know it's a standard in Unreal to have ambient occlusion, metallic, and roughness on the channels. One thing to bear in mind is that not all image formats, especially PNG, the way that they store information, the alpha channel is not always treated equally. So that's something to bear
Okay.
in mind. I don't know the details offhand, but you do have to be careful when you do that because you may end up with some parts of your texture being more compressed than others. I think the alpha channel on PNG is actually a compressed channel, whereas everything else in it is lossless. Don't quote me on that. I know there's something funky with using the alpha channel, but yes, you you're quite right. You can use the different channels as different things. In fact, I do that in the modeling BCS modeling course. So we actually paint going to Munster's question earlier, we paint different textures on our barrels. So we have a metallic layer, we have a roughness layer, and we have a diffuse layer, and we manually paint those on. So do check that out if you want a more detailed exploration of texture painting.
And finally, I'm going to say and finally, because otherwise we'll do this all night.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
fun,
yeah,
but we will have to eat at some point.
Nom, nom,
BB
nom.
Game Dev. I wanted to say BB King. You are not BB King. I'm pretty sure you're not BB King, but if you are, can I have an autograph? Do you cover texture atlas creation in any of your courses?
Not as yet, because we've not actually come across anything that we've used a texture atlas for in anything that we've made.
Now, we keep talking about having, in the next Godot course, having a bunch of pre-made assets that people can use
Yeah.
that include pre-made characters. So we'll have Tukey, we'll have Avery and Annie Bunny,
Yeah.
we'll have Boris the Bat. Can we have low poly?
Yes.
But that might be a good time to have an atlas sheet, because when
Yes.
you start, sorry, Cat. When you start dealing with multiple sprites,
Yeah.
and why were you behind me anyway, Cat? It's just more efficient than loading in a whole bunch of textures.
Mm. Yes, and going back to our previous comment that you can, it will vary depending on the platform you're producing for, whether or not you need smaller sets or larger sets. Obviously, there's a great example that I love using. Imagine you've got a matchbox and you need to move the matchbox with all of the files in it from one place to another. Typically, it's a larger container and it can just be moved very quickly. However, if I asked you to move all of those matches individually from one space to another, i.e., the transfer of data, whether it's going into RAM or the graphics card, if you've got to move a lot of smaller things, it can actually take longer than just moving one big thing. So it's a balance. If is that a Rugrats mug? Are you talking about my mug? Squirrel.
No, that is from Up.
That is from Up.
Although I've not watched the Rugrats show, but I have watched the Rugrats movie, and it was kind of amazing. And then I rewatched it 10 years later, and it was still kind of amazing. I haven't watched it in the last 5 years, but it's a good movie.
So Up is a fantastic movie, but I hate the first 10 minutes.
I mean, the first 10 minutes are fantastic. They're just really sad.
Yeah, right. It's just like, but that's a classic trope in a lot of Disney films. Make everybody feel sad,
Yeah.
and then the rest of the film is just happy. So fantastic. Just to wrap everything up this evening, we have launched a brand new course, Geometry Nodes for Blender 3.
I mean, I'm doing a hooray. Mikey did all the work on this one. I got to sit here.
Just a reminder, it's actually on special at the moment. There's a launch week special, so that should take you through that link there. That should take you through to the course itself. Yes, I'm just going to make sure it works. I've been pasting it to everybody. Yep.
And once again, I am very sorry about these weird things I'm doing with my fingers. I'm trying to make my hands work.
Wrap it up. Very, very good.
Turned down for what? Or to get the first half on ketchup.
Yep.
I think I need new glasses. I actually did read that as very good cheese. I will try the rest on ketchup. Then I realized what he actually wrote and thought, yep, these glasses are old.
Okay. And I'll leave you all with in fact
A song.
So before we go, I'll just play the course itself, not the whole course, but the intro to the course. I'll put that on now, and we will come back to say goodbye. So I'll see you guys in 1 minute.
Hey folks, welcome. My name's Erin and I'll be your instructor for this section. In this part we're going to be looking at geometry nodes, and geometry nodes has actually been in Blender since 2.91. However, in between 2.93 and 3.0 there was a major redesign in the nodes, and so we're going to be exploring this new system called fields now that it's had some time to settle. In this section we're going to learn the UI, we're going to learn to navigate, and some useful shortcuts that are going to help you moving forwards. We'll learn to create a reusable tool as a node group that you can share and use across multiple files. And we'll take this as far as creating an entire scene animated within a single node tree. I'm really excited to see where you're going to take these tools. Having proceduralism as an option for you to lean back on really does elevate your workflow. It lets you really scale things, work stuff at a greater level of fidelity and complexity. So, good luck. I hope to see you on the course.
Okay, fantastic. Now, just to let everybody know that if you have the original course, you get this for free. If you're on, if lifetime members should now have access to the course as well. And finally, if you're part of the Blender Creative Series, this is a free upgrade as well, as it comes under that. So if you're already enrolled in those courses, you've got the upgrade. Go and take it and see what you can make. It's slightly different. The first part of it is definitely going over the same stuff that the original course went over, and obviously is with Blender 3.3 because a lot's changed, and there's a little bit extra on the end. I think the course is about another 45 minutes longer than previous because Erin got carried away. which is absolutely fantastic for everybody.
It's great.
And later on in the year or towards the beginning of next year, we'll have a more intermediate course slash advanced for Blender geometry nodes as well. Erin's really pulled it off brilliant with this one, and I'm looking forward to the advanced stuff as well. But we need this basic course in place so you guys can level up with your geometry nodes.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that wraps up. Mikey, well done. Very nice work.
Erin shrunk. That does look nice. It does. I'm still in awe of what geometry nodes can do. I think it's a fantastic addition to the workflow you can have in Blender. Yes, Jenny. Got to do all the courses. And remember to share your work over on our Discord as well.
Yes. And remember, buy the course like 6 or 7 times.
Yep.
Double its listed price.
I don't know if you can gift the course on our site. I'll have to have a look at that.
Can GeoNodes export to Godot? No, but the product can. So you can make it in GeoNode and then export it, but you can't export the node system.
Yes, yeah. Again, in the procedural weapons course, I go over the export process into Godot as well. So,
yep.
Awesome. We shall wrap up there, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. I've had lots of fun.
Yep. I've had lots of fun too, even though my hand is seizing up. It's weird. Thank you very much, everybody. Yes. And thank you, Michael.
And all being well, we'll see you all next week. Same time. Yep. Bye.
Bye.
I've used the wrong hand. Bye.
Yeah, this is definitely
bye, everyone.
Bye. Press it.
I'm pressing
Press
it.
it.
Hold on.
This hand doesn't work. Bye.